Hello, this is Phil McKinney, and yes, this is not the normal podcast. I'm excited to announce that the Killer Innovations podcast has been picked up for national syndication as a talk radio show. Who would have ever thought? The show will be live each Sunday, 5 p.m. Eastern, 2 p.m. Pacific, on the BizTalk Radio Network. My mission and why I started this podcast, and my true passion, is to help you take your ideas and change your world. Whether that's your personal objectives, your career, your business, or if your mission is to change society. The following is show number 1. It's the prototype show that I broadcast live last Sunday. Future shows will have world-changing innovators sharing how they went from their idea to game-changing innovations and all of the bumps and frustrations along the way, so that you can learn how to take your idea and be a game changer. Now, we will be experimenting with other formats and other content. Help me by giving me your feedback. Listen to this show number 1, and then go over to philmckinney.com and leave me a comment at the bottom of the show notes. I would greatly appreciate it. Without any further ado, show number 1.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Here's a great quote for this to start off the show this week. You don't learn to walk by following rules. You learn by doing and falling down over and over again. That quote's from Richard Branson. Now think about it. No one ever learns to walk by reading a book or watching a YouTube video or sitting in a classroom. You learn by doing, by falling over and over again. And the same can be said about innovation. Hello, I'm Phil McKinney, and welcome to Killer Innovations. While the podcast has been going on for 11 years, today's show is our inaugural show on the BizTalk Radio Network as a nationally syndicated radio show. So what have we been doing for the last 11 years? Well, we've been helping you, the listeners, go from an idea to launching game-changing innovations to help you change the world. So welcome to the garage. Come on in, have a seat. I'm coming off this week of teaching the Innovation Bootcamp course out in Sunnyvale, California. Now, I teach this course about once a year or so, but it's a pretty intense course. It takes a lot of prep work, a lot more nowadays than it used to, it seems like. After all the years of teaching this course, however, it still amazes me at how many people, especially in Silicon Valley, correlate innovation to that new shiny object, that new app, that new web service. Innovation is so much more than just those shiny objects or a cool app or some new responsive website. Anything and everything can be innovated. You can innovate your business models. You can innovate how you serve your customers. You can innovate your internal processes. You can innovate your sales activities, your advertising. I remember years ago, I taught the Innovation Bootcamp course, and one of the executive assistants at my previous job asked if she could take the course. And I said, sure, go ahead, take the course. She took it, and afterwards, she was very anxious to take on her first project. But what did she go after? Not some new gadget or some new PC or laptop. It was about expense reporting. In an organization with 100,000 employees, the average expense report took about 40 minutes. She worked across the entire organization and got that expense report down to 10 minutes. So take 30 minutes of savings times a couple 100,000 employees traveling a couple of times a year. You can just imagine the impact of that innovation savings. But we've also seen innovation in how you raise money with things like Kickstarter, etc. I've even gotten an email from somebody who used the innovation approaches and processes from the podcast to actually figure out a new way to clean their bathrooms. Don't ask me how, but that was one of the things they wanted to go after. So it's no matter what you're working on, it can be innovated. I've learned... But one of the things that I focus on is not to settle for the run-of-the-mill innovations, but innovations that literally change the world. And it's not just about tech. Now, many people out there, when I talk about innovation, think that I'm only talking about technology because of my career. I spent a decade at Hewlett-Packard, retiring as the CTO, thought I was retiring, and then I jumped back into the innovation game as the CEO of an industry R&D lab. But the fact is that, as I said before, innovation can be anything. It's not just about tech. But the key to innovation is don't settle for the obvious incremental. It's easy to settle, but it's easy to do the obvious. But guess what? All of your competitors are doing the obvious. That's why I named this show Killer Innovations. So what is a killer innovation? A killer innovation is a significant and highly profitable departure from current offerings or practices that would be difficult, if not impossible, to duplicate. So what do I mean by significant? It has to be unique. It has to be something that isn't obvious to everybody, something that you've uncovered, something you've really thought about, some unique insight that you bring to the game. Also, highly profitable. It's not about just the cash side of profitability, albeit that's important if you're running a for-profit business. But high profitability can also be attributed to things like nonprofits. If you can find a way to reduce the overhead costs so that more money goes and serves the nonprofit targets that you're trying to serve, that's highly profitable. But the fact is that if you're doing good innovation, good research and development, the development of interesting kinds of solutions, capabilities, you're either going to see significant cost savings or your customers are going to reward you with a significant margin premium. So that's what I mean by highly profitable. And then difficult to duplicate. You need to create some kind of barrier for others before they can come in and just replicate what you're doing and take that market share. It could be the speed of innovation. It could be the fact that you're way out ahead and they can't catch you. What I have found in the innovation game is it's not about patents and intellectual properties and who's filed the first patent, but it's really about the execution. A lot of people come up with lots of great ideas, very few ever execute. So what are some great examples of killer innovations? One would be Google. It fundamentally changed the business model for advertising, and for search for that matter. Amazon disrupted the economics of selling books, but now Amazon sells pretty much anything and everything you could want. Intel wins by its relentless pace of innovation, what they call the tick-tock cycle, to constantly coming out with the next generation of technologies. And then WL Gore, the makers of Gore-Tex, the waterproof materials that we have in our jackets and boots and shoes to keep us dry whenever we go out and do our outside activities. In the case of Gore, they've created a high-performance clothing category, and they stay ahead by constantly executing. Now, can anyone execute? Can anyone be an innovator of truly these kind of breakthrough, game-changing? Yes. Can anyone create a killer innovation? Definitely. This is not the limitation of, you went to a certain school or you have a certain expertise or your parents came from money or you have some form of financial means. The ability to come up with killer innovations is purely limited by your creativity, your passion for your ideas. And most people I run into do not consider themselves creative. It's the fact that they just don't know how to take that spark of an idea and do something with it. Now, that's why we created the podcast, and now we have the radio show. And I have to tell you, if you haven't picked up on it already today, I'm a little nervous. In the case of the podcast, we pre-record it, we produce it, and it gets posted every week as part of it. The radio show, we're live. There are no mulligans. So needless to say, I'm a little nervous today because I don't get a do-over. But in the case of the radio show, I wanted to walk the talk. I'm a big believer that fear is one of the biggest things that holds us back from really getting out there and doing the new things. And needless to say, coming in and jumping into doing a weekly live radio show has me totally freaked out. So, this is the inaugural show. Now, when I look back on the podcast when we started 11 years ago, and it started in a hotel bathroom in a Marriott in Arizona, don't ask. And the original mission for it was really to get out there and share my expertise and share my knowledge and my background. But the reason that was really the catalyst was from my mentor. Now, I had a great early mentor in my career, Bob Davis, who's now retired living in Arizona, and he invested a huge amount of time and direction into my career. Now, I went back to him and said, how do I pay it back? You put so much energy and time into my early career, which really laid the foundation for my long-term success. And as a result, I was asking, how do I pay it back? And what he said is you can't pay it back. You have to pay it forward. And the podcast came to me as an idea to really get out there and see if I could find the mechanisms and find a means to get out there to pay it back. Now, the one thing you have to keep in mind is that when we started the podcast 11 years ago, there was no iTunes. There was nothing. We jumped in long before any of the new media methods were out there. YouTube, iTunes, none of it was there. And we started from ground zero. But given the feedback and the following and the listener base and the comments we've gotten back, that's what's kept us going. And now with this radio show, we're hoping to take this to an entirely new and different level. And this kind of ties back to the quote that I opened the show with, which was Richard Branson saying, "You don't learn to walk by following the rules. You learn by doing and falling over and over again." As I said, when we started, there were no rules. We were jumping in blind. And in this case, in the form of this radio show, I'm jumping in blind. So are you convinced that you can be creative? Now, I don't want to burst your balloon. Creativity by itself is not enough. When we come back, we're going to talk about those people who rain on your parade, the haters, what I call the innovation or corporate antibodies. If you have a great idea, get ready because the haters will come out of the woodwork. So how do you deal with them? When we come back, I'll show you how I overcome the haters. I'm Phil McKinney, and this is Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network.
This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
Michael Bloomberg has this great quote: "Don't be afraid to assert yourself, have confidence in your abilities, and don't let the bastards get you down." And when it comes up with an idea, get ready for others to dump all over it. It's just the nature of innovation, and believe me, I've faced it all. I'm Phil McKinney, and we're here to show you how to take your idea and change the world. Do you have a great idea? Have you ever come up with that really great idea? You get out there and you start showing it to other people, or you start sharing it, and all of a sudden, the skeptics come out and they just attack it. It's what I call the innovation or the corporate antibodies. So what are antibodies? They're the antagonists of the innovator. These are the people within the organization who take it upon themselves to be the protector. It's much like the antibody or your immune system that's trying to attack those foreign objects that may harm the body. It's that experience of going in front of somebody who thinks that it's their role to always say no. They think of your idea as really a threat. You're there to destabilize the organization, when in reality, you're trying to take your organization or your idea to the next level. It's the same as the human body rejecting something like a transplanted organ. Now, that transplanted organ is critical to the survival of those people who get a heart transplant or a lung transplant. But in cases of organizations, they will reject just like the body rejects, and that rejection is not always good. Corporate antibodies can stunt a company's growth. And it can shut down those fresh ideas that unconventional thinkers so badly need. It's that whole process of opening up and being open to accepting those new ideas. Now, what I have found is the antibodies are just the first of many roadblocks you come through when you're trying to get your idea, your innovation move forward. And they're everywhere. Many people think antibodies are only there from the standpoint of the large organizations. But in reality, they're there even in small organizations. They're there even in the 5-person startup. I've seen it happen in all sizes. So what are the excuses that the antibodies use? It's typically that verbal reaction. Sometimes it's a facial reaction. When you're going out there and you're sharing that new idea that you think is so great. Now, I've heard them all, but here are a few that I've collected over the years, such as, I have something better, or, we've tried that before, it won't fit on our operation, or it won't return enough return on investment. Now, that last one most likely comes from the person who controls the money, either the CEO of the organization or the CFO in the organization. Or, I already thought of that a long time ago, or we can't afford that, or it'll never get approval, or you're on the right track, don't rock the boat. The market's not ready for it. Our customers won't like it this way. Or the last one, we are legally obliged to follow these rules. This last one's an interesting one. It's one that I added on to the list that I'd heard directly. Years ago, I was a founder at a company in the telecom space, which is a regulated industry. And we were going to work on a new way of serving customers. Radically change the way customers could self-support new phone services, new broadband services for their small business. What I heard from the lawyers, though, is that, you can't do it that way because it doesn't meet the regulatory requirement. It's illegal. You cannot do that. And me being the proverbial skeptic, I challenged the lawyers to say, okay, here's the deal. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to do this. Soon as you can actually show me the verbiage, the regulatory requirements, then I'll stop. But I'm not going to use the excuse that you're throwing in front of me that you think it's illegal or you strongly believe it's illegal, and therefore I shouldn't even start the project. Lo and behold, the legal team went off, and they spent months trying to find that legal regulatory requirement. And guess what? They never found it. In fact, what had happened is if you'd asked all of the regulators and regulatory bodies within companies that we ended up with, that they looked at, we ended up in a situation where they all thought it was the rule, but it wasn't the rule. It wasn't there was no regulatory requirement along those lines to restrict it. So we, in effect, actually went ahead and launched that service and launched that product. So this last one, where people are using legal or regulatory requirements, I found specifically to be the ones where they got pushed back. They actually couldn't find it. Now, given all the ones I've heard over the years, I've come up with a kind of grouping of antibodies, buckets that I kind of put people in. First one is the ego antibody. These are those people within the organization who think of themselves as the creative person who's supposed to be coming up with the new idea. Your idea, they find it as threatening. And some of the answers you'll hear from them was, I already tried that a long time ago. Somebody else has already come up with that idea, or I have a better idea. The other kind of antibody is what I call the fatigued antibody. These are the people who were the innovators before you arrived. They've tried it and failed. These are the people who have the excuse of, you'll never get it approved, or we tried that before, or it's not going to fit in our operation. Another kind of antibody that I just love are the no-risk antibodies. These are the people who basically see themselves as trying to de-risk to the organization. You're a threat. Their job is to protect the organization. And you're going to get the answers like, not enough return on investment, or we can't afford to do that. Then you run into the old timers, what I sometimes refer to as the comfort antibodies, which these are the people who are trying to prevent, they don't want to rock the boat. These are the people who are kind of retired in place. The answers you'll get from them is, we've always done it this way. Our customer likes it that way. Don't rock the boat. Now, keep in mind, at some point, we all become antibodies. I'm now a CEO at a company, and I actually got called out a couple of times for being the corporate antibody. we get comfortable with how things are always done. It's the way it's worked in the past, and you get comfortable with the fact that you are an expert and that you've always done it that way before. And so the key is not the fact that we can just identify who these antibodies are, but what do you do about them? How do you get around them? What are the ways and strategies to actually get around this kind of first speed bump to taking your idea and really putting it out there and changing the world? So when we come back, I'm going to show you some of my tricks, or some would say my judo moves. And this is actually, I'll take it as a compliment from some of my past bosses when I play some of these moves on them. And then afterwards, they heard me talk about it. They realized I pulled a quick one on them. So I'm going to share with you all of my tricks on how to get the antibodies to align with you. We've all faced them, and to be successful, you need to know how to get around them. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. I'm Phil McKinney, and this is Killer Innovations.
Biz Talk Radio. This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
I love this quote from Henry Ford. Nothing is particularly hard if you divide it into small jobs. Now, the corollary to this is that old joke about how do you eat an elephant, which is one bite at a time. I'm Phil McKinney. We're all about helping you take your best ideas and turn them into killer, or what we sometimes refer to as game-changing innovations. In the last segment, we were talking about haters. And as I warned you, they're going to come out of the woodwork. Just deal with the fact that when you're coming up with really great breakthrough, game-changing ideas, everybody's going to have an opinion. They're all going to come out and be negative. So what are some of those tricks? What are some of those judo moves? And why do you need to know these tricks? Well, fact is that pure logic rarely changes the mind of an antibody. When someone's negative to an idea, if you're trying to go and try to convince them that, no, my idea is a really great idea, the fact is, though, logic doesn't apply, because what's happened is they're applying emotion. They see themselves as the protector. They believe they're keeping the organization safe. If it's a family member, maybe you're thinking about a new idea to go off and create some new product or service and launch it yourself, and some family member's negative. In some cases, they're viewing themselves as a protector of you. Oh, no, don't take that risk. Don't put that money behind that idea. So the question is how do you get around them? How do you convince them, or how do you bring them onto your side to actually be in support of the idea? Now, the fact is that you're dealing with these emotions. They see themselves as these gatekeepers, and that last line of defense. And that emotional bond that they have becomes very, very hard for you to come up against. And if you can't develop the skills to work around the antibodies, you're going to struggle with every one of your ideas. As you work on coming up with new and better ideas, or come up with launching new companies or new products or new technologies, whatever it might be, if you cannot figure out a way to get around the antibodies, you're going to struggle. Your ideas basically will fall flat right out of the gate. So let's talk about some examples of some corporate antibodies that blocked what I would think is, and I think you're going to agree, some really great ideas. So, for example, in 1976, Steve Wozniak, one of the co-founders of Alpha Computer, was working at HP. In March of that year, he actually built the first personal computer. Now, the rumor inside of HP was at that time, Steve worked in the calculator division at HP, was that he was actually using some of the resources that HP had made available to all of its engineers to work on new ideas and new prototypes, and that Steve had actually worked on and used some of those materials from HP to build the first prototype of what eventually became the Apple I computer. Now, he took it around, he took it to his manager, a guy by the name of Steve Cochran. Cochran looked at it and came back with an answer that says, something, I really don't get this whole PC thing. Why would anybody want a PC? Cochran was, in effect, the corporate antibody. And it's quite funny because years later, I actually interviewed Cochran in an old podcast from something like 2009 in which he shares this story. And Cochran actually comes back at the end of the interview, and you can go back and find it over at killerinnovations.com and look it up. And he actually goes through the whole process of Wozniak coming to him with this prototype of this PC, and Cochran coming to the answer that says, no, HP is not going to be interested in this. Why would anybody want a PC? And all the standard antibodies. And what did Wozniak do? Wozniak was smart enough to actually get HP to sign a document to release him so that he could actually take the product outside of HP and bring it to market. And the fact is that product that Steve worked on while he was working at Hewlett-Packard in Silicon Valley, that was the foundation that launched Apple Computer. So, and it's funny with the antibodies is we all have 20/20 vision. We don't think of ourselves as the antibodies. We don't think of ourselves as killing somebody's idea. But here's a perfect example of a corporate antibody not seeing the vision, not understanding what the potential was. However, the innovator said, okay, if you're going to be the antibody and not allow me to bring it and have it be done inside this entity, I'm going to take it out. I'm going to risk it all. I'm going to launch it. And now you got the most valuable company in the world. So what do? You need to convince the antibody that you aren't a threat, that your idea is actually aligned and complementary to what the role of the organization is, or your vision of what the potential is. Now, when you start to see your idea as good change, when you get them to see it as a good change with a clear path to success, then you can start winning them over. And there are fundamentally, I'll say 3, but I'm actually going to give you 4 ways to convince or to get past the corporate antibodies. The first one is come up with a better pitch, storytelling. How do you tell a story about your idea? It's what I refer to as strategic storytelling. It's not about a bunch of PowerPoint slides. And in fact, when I'm being pitched by new startup companies looking for investment capital, or a great technologist who's looking to build a prototype of a product, it's not about, 500 PowerPoint slides. I'm a firm believer of the rule that Guy Kawasaki puts out there called 10-20-30. 10 slides, 20 minutes, and nothing less than a 30-point font. If you can't follow the 10-20-30 rule, then you don't know the idea well enough, and you're going to have a hard time convincing somebody else. And you got to tell the story in the form of such a way that the person you're telling the story to can position themselves in the story. Years ago, we were working on an idea about home health, and this was, how do you help people age in place? How do you let, as we all get older and health becomes an issue, how do we get people to be able to live at home, stay at home, be able to have a happy life without having to be, shipped off to a nursing home? The team that was pitching this idea actually pitched it and actually did all these great graphics around it, showing me with my grandmother, who at that time was 90 years old, living by herself in Cincinnati, Ohio. So I could see myself in the story. I could see myself using these technologies to help monitor my grandmother, making sure she was up and that she took her medicines and all these. And guess what? We funded that idea. We worked on that project. Tell the pitch in such a way that people can see themselves in it. They can see how they're going to benefit, or how their kids benefit, or how their parents benefit, or how their spouse benefit. Make it emotional. Don't make it this theoretical that there's X hundreds of millions of people in this market segment, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. make the pitch personal. Second is, you need to subsume them into your idea. The way to do that is what I call the coffee cup trick. When I go in to make a pitch, I actually take a PowerPoint presentation, I crumple up the paper, I put coffee stains all over it, and that makes the pitch look like it's a prototype. I go in and I find a key person that I need to convince. I need their buy-in if this idea is going to go forward. And as a result of that, then, I'm going to convince them that, hey, this is a draft mode. Why don't you give me some ideas? The rule here is whatever wordage they give you, put it on the slides automatically. Because now you have their words, you have their contribution to the idea, and therefore when you do present it to others, they are part of that team. You taking their input as part of that contribution. The third idea is eat the elephant. Break down your idea to smaller, more pieces that people are more willing to fund. They're willing to minimize that risk. So eat the elephant. Break it down. If you're still running into those walls, break it down into smaller pieces and do the smaller pieces to prove the overall value of the idea. And then the last one, go stealth. Go deep. Go dark. In some cases, in fact, maybe in a future show, I'll reveal some of the secrets of stealth projects and some of the stealth projects that I've been involved in. But these are such that, you keep them off the radar screen, because as soon as a project is visible, people are going to shoot at it. They're going to try to put a knife in that project. Go stealth, keep it stealth until the last possible moment, and then bring it out. So, when we come back, we're going to take a look at questions, and specifically killer questions that cause you to come up with even better ideas. I'm Phil McKinney, and this is Killer Innovations on the BizTalk Radio Network.
BizTalk Radio. This is Killer Innovations, a show about ideas, creativity, and how you can innovate. Welcome to the Innovator's Garage, where you learn to create your next game-changing killer innovation.
I think I've heard every excuse as to why someone can't achieve their dream, that idea, that passion, that thing that really drives them. And the most common excuse is money. I think Sam Walton put it best when he said, capital isn't scarce, vision is. I'm Phil McKinney, and this is Killer Innovations. We're all about helping you take your best ideas and changing the world. I'm a big believer in questions. Now, why? Why am I so passionate about asking good questions? The fact is a question is extremely powerful because you cannot answer it. For example, what is half of 13? Now, you've answered it, and you're back listening to me. Questions force you to stop and think. You actually can't help yourself. And you can use this hack, or what I refer to as this brain hack, to ask yourself questions that will force you to look at an opportunity or look at a problem you're facing in a way that you just never considered. So going forward, each week in the show, we're going to take a look at one such question and how it can help you solve a problem, come up with the next great idea, solve a social issue, whatever it is. We're going to look at one question each week. So this week, we're going to take a look at a question that I use quite often in my workshops around assumptions. Assumptions are a real challenge for innovation. We need to discover kind of these rules under which our organizations and our industries operate. The key here is to be able to, get those assumptions, get them out of our head, get them out on the paper, and only then can you shed, those old constraints that are holding you back. Once you get those assumptions out there, then you can start being open and coming up with new ones. So, this week's killer question is, what are the assumptions under which my industry operates? Again, what are the assumptions under which my industry operates? Now, in order to move forward beyond assumption industry, you need to first be able to identify them, and it's harder than it seems. Our assumptions are so ingrained in us that they appear, less a personal belief and more of a universal truth. If you recall back in the last segment, we were talking about, the regulatory requirement. You have to do that because it's regulatory required. That was an assumption that the industry had that proved to be absolutely false. So what are yours? What are the assumptions? What are the rules that your industry operates in? Are you in the construction business? Or are you in technology? Are you in software? Are you in hotels, restaurants, financial? Take a hard look at your industry. What are those assumptions? Often, when you do consider the rules, it's about what does your customer's experience look like? And it's really around all of those rules that allow you to operate. So early on, this is back in 2010 when I first got approached to write my book, and it was being published by Hyperion. The publishers, the publisher-in-chief, the CEO for Hyperion, invited me to come to New York and actually teach an innovation workshop to the entire Hyperion staff. Now remember, this is 2010. And now I actually gave them a little bit of a hard time because basically they were using the fact that they had an author deal with me to get free consulting. Hey, that's fine. I'm fine with that. But we went in and looked at it. And remember in 2010, the publishing industry was really kind of at the peak of its big transformation. And some of the questions were, how do customers make the decision to even buy a book? How do they purchase it? Are they still going into retail? What's that shift to online ordering, the ebook, growth? How do you find authors? What's the role of the publisher these days, back in 2010, to even be able to identify who would be a good author of a new book, much less the author contracts? Now, in my case, having become an author for my first book, I kind of went through this whole process, and I probably caught the book publishing industry at the worst possible time, right? It was a little bit too early to get into the whole self-publishing mode, albeit there was some activities in the self-publishing. But all of the money had already been pulled out of the publishing industry, and there was just no support, no resources being provided by the major book publishers, unless you're doing some huge fiction book, a Harry Potter or something like that. So here I was, I'm a new author, and I'm catching it at literally the worst possible time to try to publish my book. So I actually put together a series of questions, and I actually sent the Hyperion team basically to go out into the world. When I assign a question, I assign questions that cannot be answered sitting at your desk. They physically had to go out. So in this case, being in New York, we did a field trip down to the Barnes & Noble at Penn Station in New York City and had them actually go and talk to customers, actually walk up to a customer and say, hey, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? How did you find the book? How did you like that book? And it proved to be a real eye-opener for them. So here are some further questions that tie into this. How do you identify these assumptions? Such as, why is your industry structured the way it is? What are the rules for how your industry interacts with customers, with manufacturers, distributors, retailers? What would be the effect on your business if these assumptions changed? Which of these assumptions could you change that would radically alter your position in the industry? Now, I'll have all these written up in the show notes, so you can find those over at killerinnovations.com. But again, this week's killer question is, what are the assumptions under which my industry operates? Now, what's really interesting about this is here I'm actually attacking an assumption in the podcast industry, right? Podcast was set out to really be to destroy or replace radio. Here I am, an 11-year podcaster, actually coming back to radio. So I guess I'm challenging the assumption of the podcast industry by doing this radio show. So this is the inaugural episode, or some could say pilot episode of the show. And this is not going to be the format of the show going forward. Rather than you listening to me jabber on for an hour, we'll be inviting leading innovators from around the world to come into the garage and share their stories and how they created their own game-changing innovations. Next week, our guest will be DP Venkatesh, co-founder of Importal. So each week, my mission is to convince you that you can take your idea and go out and change the world. So don't miss out. Visit us at killerinnovations.com, but also don't miss out the great shows on BizTalk Radio Network over at biztalkradio.com. If you know an innovator, drop me a note, Phil at killerinnovations.com. I'm Phil McKinney, and you've been listening to Killer Innovations. See you next week.
The opinions you hear on Biz Talk Radio are those of the hosts, callers, and guests, and do not necessarily reflect those of this station, Biz Talk Radio, its management, or advertisers. The information on Biz Talk Radio does not constitute a recommendation, offer, or solicitation to buy or sell any product or service. If you have any questions about Biz Talk Radio, contact us at 817-274-1609 or at biztalkradio.com. Biz Talk Radio.